Today we're going to be looking at God's favorite Bible verse. We're also going to be looking at how that verse gives us a clue about when Christ is going to return to earth. So first, what is God's favorite Bible verse? Well, the Old Testament verse that God really seems to like is Psalm 110, verse 1. The reason this has been called God's favorite Bible verse is because out of all the Old Testament verses that are quoted in the New Testament, Psalm 110, verse 1 is repeated more than any other Old Testament verse. God's favorite Bible verse says this: "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool." Okay, so what does that have to do with the timing of Christ's return? Quite a bit, actually. If you look at how the New Testament interprets this verse, if I could paraphrase, basically the idea is that after Jesus died and rose again, he ascended into heaven. When he went back to heaven, he sat down at the right hand of God the Father. And there he sits, ruling and reigning and waiting. Waiting until what? Waiting until his enemies are made his footstool. So Christ rose back to heaven, returned to heaven, seated at the right hand of the Father. He's not leaving that heavenly throne to return to earth until his enemies are made his footstool. If you don't believe my interpretation of Psalm 110, verse 1, I really encourage you, go to the New Testament and look at how the New Testament interprets that verse for us. I'm thinking in particular of passages like 1 Corinthians 15, verses 24 through 26, and Hebrews chapter 10, verses 12 and 13. For instance, Hebrews chapter 10, verses 12 and 13 say that Jesus sacrificed himself for our sins. He rose into heaven. He sat down at the right hand of the Father, and there he waits until his enemies are made his footstool. So, when is Jesus coming back? Well, we don't know exactly, of course, but according to God's favorite Bible verse, he's not coming back until his enemies are subdued. When will that be? Well, look around you. Does it look like Christ's enemies are subdued? Sure doesn't look that way to me, which means we probably have a long way to go until Christ returns. Now, if the idea of Christ slowly, progressively subduing his enemies before he returns sounds strange to you, the only reason it sounds strange is because you're a modern day Christian. And by modern day, I mean you're probably younger than 125 years old. But if you had lived in America in the 1600s or the 1700s or even the 1800s, that idea that Jesus is not going to return until after his enemies are subdued, that idea wouldn't sound strange at all. You see, for most of American history, most Christians, not all, but most believed that through the preaching of the gospel, through the discipling of the nations, Christ's enemies would slowly be subdued. All nations would be discipled. All nations would be Christian nations before Christ's return. So if your view of the end times doesn't line up with God's favorite Bible verse, may I suggest getting a new view of the end times? Again, we don't know exactly when Christ is coming back, but according to God's favorite Bible verse, it's probably going to be quite a while. Now, what does that mean for you and me? Well, it means we've got a lot of work to do. Well, if you would like to learn more about what I call the traditional American view of the end times, I'm going to have some links in the description below. One of those links will be to a short article that I wrote that's posted on my website. I'll also have some links to some audio recordings of some of the conferences that Fifth Kingdom Ministries has done on the topic of the end times. I do also hope to write a book on this subject, but it's in the works right now and it's not going to be done anytime soon. But when it is finished, I'll have a link in the description below to that book as well. If you don't see the link there, that means I'm not done with the book. Alrighty, well, thank you for listening, and until next time, we'll see you later.